Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, neurotech.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Nika Ford, and this is actually going to be something new and unique for this show because we've never had Nika on the show because basically she is a medical illustrator, and does amazing work. I just popped up on Twitter one day randomly, but I was like, this is really cool. And since then, actually, we talked like a year ago, but only finally now, she was willing to come on the show. I guess her artistic prowess has increased since then. So Nika, pleasure to have you on the show. And can you describe what you do a little bit?
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having me. So I'm a medical illustrator. This is a very niche, very small field. And basically what I do is I use art to explain complicated topics in science and medicine. So more specifically, I work in New York at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So a lot of the work that I do is academically centered. I create illustrations for researchers, faculty members, and physicians at the school. And I do a lot of illustrations as well for medical education. So working with faculty members, I create illustrations that we use in lecture slides that help the med students learn their anatomy course content. And then the illustrations that I do for journal articles and publications are usually for the researchers and physicians who are publishing their surgical techniques or something along those lines.
Okay, very interesting. So you have to have a pretty good knowledge of, if you're literally teaching medical students, then you have to be smarter than a medical student to be able to teach them. How does that work?
Yeah. So with medical illustration, there are 4 graduate programs in the US that offer the degree. And I went to University of Illinois, Chicago. And one of the requirements is that we actually take anatomy courses with pre-med students. So I have a background knowledge of like how the human body works, anatomy and physiology, which I learned in school. So that's like a part of being a medical illustrator, is that you actually already have to be knowledgeable in human anatomy in order to be able to depict it accurately, as well as when I'm collaborating with my clients, like when I'm collaborating with a faculty member, for example, professor of anatomy, I'll work alongside with them to make sure that what I'm creating is accurate, have them like double check it and things like that as well. But yeah, I definitely have to have a background and knowledge in it.
Yeah, I think having a good illustrator or graphic designer, having them learn anatomy versus somebody else learn graphic design, it's much easier if they already know the anatomy. But how did you get into this? Tell me like the genesis of this. And you mentioned there's only 4 schools that offer this. And so how did this come about?
Yeah, I've always been an artist since I was little. I've been drawing since I was 3 years old, practically. And even in high school, I was in an art magnet program that was centered around the arts. So I was super active in art growing up, like my whole life. And then it wasn't until my junior year of college. So I went to a liberal arts college. I was a fine arts major, 2D design. And during my junior year, I don't know, I found myself fascinated with anatomy and science, but I didn't know how to pursue that with an art degree. And so I would go to the library and just look at histology books in my free time sometimes, just because it just interests me. And what happened was it actually started to come through my paintings that I was creating. So I was creating work that was surrealistic in a way, like it would be representations of anatomy, but it wasn't accurate. It was just more like using lots of colors, maybe a little abstract, relating it to nature, those sort of things. So the human anatomy started to show through in my paintings. And I had an illustration teacher come to me one day and say, "Hey, have you ever heard of the field of medical illustration?" And at this point, I was 21 years old. I had no idea. I'd never even heard of it. And after that, I researched it and it was like history. Like I was like, okay, this is perfect. This is a way for me to use my artistic skills. And then I also got to get to learn and explore science and human anatomy, what I had been interested in. So after graduating, I didn't have a background in science at all. And one of the requirements to get into the 4 master programs that I was describing earlier is that you have to have some prerequisite science knowledge. So I took some courses as a postbaccalaureate student. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, by the way. So I was taking classes as a postbac student. I'm like immunology, chemistry, comparative anatomy, all the classes that are required for one of the grad programs. So I took 3 years off of school and I did that. And I applied to University of Illinois, Chicago. And that's when I got in. And that's a 2-year master's program where you graduate with a master's degree, Master's of Science in biomedical visualization. So biomedical visualization is basically a fancy name for medical illustration.
But it sounds more broad than just illustrations. You're not just sketching cadavers, dead bodies, but you do more than that. And you have done some more of this work. Do you want to describe that a little bit?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. So most medical illustrators do more than just 2D illustration. With advancements in technology nowadays, like there are so many programs, even there's like virtual reality and augmented reality and 3D as well. So 3D modeling. So I dabble in all of those things. I really love doing 3D models. Some of the 3D models I create are used in classroom. So the anatomy courses that some of the students are taking will actually view like a 3D model either from the faculty member or on their iPads, on their computers in class to help them get more of a 3D understanding of that organ. Some structures, like for example, like the liver or the cochlea, like structures like that are much easier to understand if you can see them in 3D and actually rotate around them. So that's why medical illustrators have a really broad skill set. And I learned like programs like 3ds Max, ZBrush. I learned all that in those 2 years of graduate school. I came into the program with just, as far as my art background, with just illustration skills, painting skills. I'd never even really digitally painted before. So I learned all that in 2 years, which is, it's a short time to learn so much. These programs are very intensive.
Yeah. Wow. So this is something that you'd put on like a tablet, or how do people visualize? Obviously you can't put it in a textbook or anything like this. So where would people consume this media?
Yeah, there are different platforms online that you can use to host 3D models. Some people actually build out their own websites and like applications for the 3D models. I actually use a website called Sketchfab. So it's a free open source website where you can upload a 3D model, and it's really cool. You have your own page on there and you can just upload all your models there. And so that's what the students use for the models that I create.
Okay. Very cool. I guess general question, why is medical illustration important? Why do you have to exist?
Yeah. When you go to the doctor's office and you see those posters on the wall of like the anatomy and stuff, one of those things that's actually everywhere, but we never actually think, oh, someone actually drew this or created this. Even our science books from like in those science courses, biology courses we take, there are illustrations of different animals and things like that. Some medical illustrators go into veterinary illustration. So yeah, it's like everywhere around us, but we never really think that someone creates it. So it's a very niche field that is so essential. For me, since I'm working in academia, medical illustration in that sense is just, it's important as far as like the visual being correlated with the text to understand what's being explained, especially when you're talking about like really complicated science or a surgical procedure. Having like a step-by-step illustration that's showing what's going on really helps with understanding. And I had a project actually a couple of years ago where I was working with a vascular surgeon, and he had written an article about a muscle sparing technique. So they were doing a below the knee amputation procedure. And so I was doing an illustration for that procedure. And what happened was he actually ended up changing his manuscript after seeing my illustration. So what happened, after I created the final illustration and I sent it to him, the illustration was based on his text, he realized that it wasn't actually what he was wanting to describe. And he hadn't noticed that until actually visualizing it from the illustration I created. So that's an example of like how medical illustration is so practical in its use as far as someone really understanding something, in that case, even the author, because we normally think about the viewer or the audience understanding, but it can even help with the person who is even describing the technique. Some medical illustrators are listed as second authors on papers exactly for this reason.
Wow. So medical illustrators save lives. If we all had a medical illustrator following us, then maybe we'd all be happier civilization. That was actually going to be my next question. Do you have any other success stories from this? That's pretty amazing, but maybe something else, like maybe people learned some material better, or other positive feedback you've gotten?
Thanks. Yeah. Actually, so one of the things I mentioned earlier with the new technology, augmented reality and virtual reality, which is just a whole like new field now that I feel is really starting to blow up, but hasn't really caught on a lot yet, especially not with medical schools. But one of the things that we want to do is eventually have virtual reality or augmented reality somehow used within the classroom. There are not a lot of institutions that are doing this yet, but I know that it's something that's being like talked about and looked at as like for future use. And what we did was we ran a study with a cohort of students to see how they learned using a textbook, comparing compared to virtual reality of specifically the trigeminal nerve anatomy. And the reason why we wanted to do this, I actually worked with a couple of scholarly year students who were wanting to run the study. So I collaborated with them. And we just really wanted to see if virtual reality helped the student retain the information better or anything like that, help with the understanding overall, basically. So it was a study that we ran earlier this past year. What I did was I used a program called Unity, which is one of the main programs used to create virtual reality applications. And then I created a model of the trigeminal nerve within the skull and its placement, and had labels and all that stuff. So this cohort of students that we had, about 10 students, went through the virtual reality simulation of this 3D model. And then they also looked at textbook explanations of this exact same material. And so I feel like that was a really exciting project for me. Based on the research at the end, students actually enjoyed learning it in virtual reality more than they did in the textbook. So it was really cool to see that retention was harder to gauge, actually, because it's something we need a longer study on to really find out if they're really like retaining that knowledge. But the students did feel like they got more out of the virtual reality simulation because it was more exciting. So I feel like there are implications with that as far as learning, because students always find content that's more interesting, exciting. They're more eager to soak it in. So I feel like in the long run, maybe there could be some more retention there, but it's something that we want to continue.
Yeah, and it's definitely much more immersive. You're literally within it, and it's not just like a little square in your vision. And I have the Oculus Quest 2, and I'm quite impressed. Cool. I was quite impressed how good it is, because I had done like a VR thing 4 or 5 years ago, and I was like, okay, this is nice. But then I ended up getting the Quest 2. I'm just like, whoa, this is like light years ahead of where it was, and it's good. But it could be much better. So I think, and then academia is a little bit slow to adapt sometimes. So I think they might be one of the last ones that you might be having other people, maybe revolutionary teaching modules like yours could really teach these medical students much better. But yeah, it's amazing that you were doing that. Actually, I had no idea. That's really cool.
Yeah, so we use the Oculus Rift, but I do like the Oculus Quest 2 because it's cordless. So that's awesome as well.
So I'm curious if people are interested in this kind of career path, is this something you would recommend? Is it something that really only one person can do, or can many people can do it? And how would you set about becoming a medical illustrator or something similar?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of medical illustrators have either a background in art or a background in science. So you don't necessarily have to be just like an incredible artist. I feel like I just naturally had a talent for it, and I had been drawing like my whole life. So I kind of came into it with a like pretty good art, like range of art skills. But there have also been people who come into medical illustration with maybe minimal art skills, but have a very heavy science background. And then what they'll do is take like figure drawing courses to improve their art skills and then apply to the program. So I feel like if you have just a strong background or interest in either one of those, and then also practice like the opposite. So for me, I had the background in art, but then I took some science courses. So whichever side you fall on, doing a little more of the opposite to get that both of those art and science like in there in your repertoire before going into one of the programs is like the best way, I feel like. But you don't have to be well versed in both before you embark on medical illustration. There are also some undergrad programs. There are a few. So also going to an undergrad program is a great way too to get you set up into going into the graduate program. The graduate programs, there are 4 accredited ones. There are maybe 2 that are not accredited, but I would say out of the 4 grad programs, that's where you get like the most like training. And yeah, I think that one of the things that is really important is the ability to be able to draw what. So I know that still life, like they want to see that you can do a still life pretty well, that you understand light on form. So with my background in art, I already had that. But for some of my classmates that had more of a science background, they would just practice still lifes at home and take figure drawing courses to just like up that part of their portfolio and then continue on with the program that way and apply. So yeah, I think the most valuable art skill is being able to draw from.
So you're going to have to draw those bowls of fruit regardless, huh?
Yeah, you'll have to draw those and the vases, yeah.
Very cool. Nika, this has been really informative. Hopefully some people found this interesting, and you not only you do this for academia, but can we also say that you do this on the side as well, freelance?
Yeah.
Yep. So do you want to talk a little bit about your freelance work as well?
Yeah, so I do freelance work on the side, and a lot of medical illustrators actually do freelance work on the side of their 9 to 5. It's actually very common for us to do that. I usually get a lot of clients off of Twitter. My Twitter is nika_Ford_. I think like putting yourself out there is a really good way to get work in this field. And not a lot of people know about it. And just exposure is really important. I also do outreach to high schools and stuff to inform them about this field because it's just it's not known and it's so essential. Yeah, I usually take on several projects and clients on the side pretty regularly.
Yeah, and this is, I guess, like how long does it take to do an image? Maybe you don't necessarily need to say like how long does it really take? How long do you tell people that it takes? But could you do an entire textbook in a week or something like that? Or does one image take you like a year or something?
Yeah, so usually depends on the kind of project. So when I do something that's more schematic, like more on the graphic side with not a lot of detail, I could finish an illustration like that in maybe a week. And then more rendered illustrations that are high in detail, say, for example, the surgical illustration may take me like about a month to complete. And the reason why is because I work on anywhere from 8 to 12 projects at one time. And this is with my job and they come in on a rolling basis. So because I'm juggling like multiple projects at once, that's why it takes that amount of time. But if I were to maybe just work on one illustration and then not have anything else on my plate, I could finish one in like maybe 2 or 3 days.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. Nika, this has been very interesting, very unique career path. I love it. And maybe we'll be able to use your services one day at somewhere, some of the listeners as well. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's a super exciting field. I love this work. I think the really cool thing about being in this field is that I'm always on like the cutting edge of new medical procedures or science research. For example, the famous COVID model that you guys have probably seen, it's gray with the red protein spikes, that was created by medical illustrators who work at the CDC. So we're really on the cutting edge of visualizing new science. So that's what's really exciting about doing this work too, is that I'm always learning about new procedures and things like that and being able to visualize them and visualize novel techniques as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.